The reason you hear about a millionaire or a billionaire that is bankrupt is usually because the journalists misrepresents the actual bankruptcy. If I was a billionaire and I owned business A, B, C and D, and business D went out of business and bankrupted, a journalist might write that, you, Jews went bankrupt, when in fact I didn't, my D business did, and I still have A, B and C, and even my own personal holdings.
Corporations are legal entities in their own right. That's the whole point. It shields stakeholders from financial or legal liability. So if the corporation declares bankruptcy, only the assets owned by the corporation are on the hook. Any profits taken out of the corporation by stakeholders before bankruptcy are not on the hook.
It's a little more complicated than this. I had a client declare bankruptcy once and the court asked me to return a payment made before the bankruptcy. This is to prevent corporate officers from paying their friends and then declaring bankruptcy. I believe there's a 90-day rule for outsiders and a 1-year rule for insiders, but I'm not certain it always works that way. I wound up not having to pay because the payment was in the normal course of business and I made it clear to the trustee that it was not worth his time to try to collect it.
A business is a separate entity from an owner's personal assets. If it's done right, imagine if you own stock in a company that went bankrupt. Should you therefore have all of your possessions taken away in that bankruptcy? Of course not. You couldn't have commerce if everything were tied together without separation. Nobody would be willing to take any risk as investors or entrepreneurs. And even if it were, most times it wouldn't cover the debt to avoid a bankruptcy anyway. The real ELI5 for a Chapter 11 bankruptcy, restructuring of a corporation, is this. If a business is worth saving, meaning it can make money but has other problems, like it borrowed too much debt, in the bankruptcy, the company will get new owners. The people who owned the company before the bankruptcy will not own it after the bankruptcy. Either the business will be sold to a new buyer, or the people who are owed money, the creditors, will end up owning the post-bankruptcy company. The business itself will be preserved, along with employee jobs and vendor relationships. This is called Chapter 11 restructuring. If the business is not worth saving, it will be shut down and all of its stuff will be sold for whatever they can get. This is called Chapter 7 liquidation.
There are different types of bankruptcies. Some of them only have a court-ordered debt repayment plan if the one your creditors give you isn't something you can pay back. Another reorganizes your debts and assets. Another liquidates your assets to pay off the debt you can, which I'm assuming is what you're referring to. Bankruptcy doesn't always mean sell everything to try and pay everything off.
This adage is applicable. If a bank lends you $100 and you don't pay it back, that's a problem for you. Maybe damage to your FICO. If a bank lends you $500 million and you don't pay it back, that's a problem for the bank. The bank will do whatever it can not to lose $500 million. And if that means letting a company keep an asset so that they can run the business and give back the bank $250 million in a new loan, the bank, even if not fair, will do that. They will work to mitigate the loss. They don't care about you. They care about the money. A couple things. The company will typically lose something in this process. They won't keep everything. The American Bankruptcy Code is designed to keep companies in operation as debts are recut in an equitable way. The European systems typically steer companies to dissolution, where the owner would likely lose everything.
Many have their assets as part of a corporation. There are many types of bankruptcy, and only Chapter 7 is where everything is liquidated and you lose things, but even then not everything. Chapter 11 is used by millionaires, billionaires, which is basically a restructuring of debt and the creation of a 5-year payment plan. People have huge misconceptions about what bankruptcy actually is.
There are many kinds of bankruptcies. Not QLL of the air that lose everything. Depending on your country's laws, they are handled differently. Bankruptcy just means you can't handle debts and obligations anymore. This could happen for a simple reason like the business being just shut down because owner wanted to retire and couldn't find anyone to buy the company.
Pretend you want to start a baby food company. You start 2 companies. Company A, All American Leasing LLC, owns the factory and all the machinery. Company B, Brilliant Baby Foods LLC, leases that factory and equipment from Company A and actually produces the product. Say the baby food actually has lead and you get sued. Well, Company B closes and declares bankruptcy, but all the proceeds were already paid to Company A as rent and leasing fees. So as the owner of both companies, you lose nothing. Later you start a third company, Super Organic Baby Foods LLC, rehire your workers, and restart your business with minimal impact.
Greater than Super Organic Baby Foods LLC. It's organic BC, it's loaded with carbon.
Because they don't file as a person. A business they own, that is its own entity, files. Their personal wealth is protected by a corporate veil that isn't easy to pierce. If my business goes belly up, I get sued into oblivion, whatever, my personal assets remain intact. Most of my business assets will as well. I own them through one company, and lease them to the company that is actually manufacturing, selling product to the masses.
Many companies are limited liabilities, sort of like people. Example: if I, an adult, declare bankruptcy, the people who I owe money to cannot go after my parents or my siblings. They can only go after my assets. Now companies can be set up the same way. Maybe I own two limited liability companies, ABC and XYZ. Each of these have their own assets and own liabilities. If company ABC declares bankruptcy, the people who the company ABC owe money to can only try to collect ABC assets. They cannot try to come after my personal assets or my other company's assets XYZ.
There are different legal entities, only some of which declare bankruptcy. For example, a real estate investors development company might go bankrupt in a real estate downturn, but any income, dividends they've paid themselves over the years isn't part of the business. No different than if your employer went bankrupt, their creditors couldn't come after past income you've earned. And for things like real estate development, each project is typically its own LLC, partially owned by the developer and other partners. So XYZ Development Corp. might set up XYZ 123 Main Street, LLC for the development of a new high-rise at 123 Main Street. Even if that project goes bankrupt, they just lose the money they've invested into that LLC, not the entirety of XYZ Corp.
Businesses can be self-owned, privately owned or publicly owned. If you have a self-employed business and declare bankruptcy, your personal assets are not safe. Whereas a publicly owned company is owned by shareholders and those shares are independent from your personal assets. So a bankrupt publicly traded company only loses its business assets, not the personal assets of the owners.
The very short answer is that the reason corporations, limited liability companies, and the like exist, is to protect the investors of a business from losing more than they put into that business. So if Mr. Founder invests $100 to start Business Corp., as long as he doesn't break the law, he isn't going to lose more than the $100 he put in. That's how someone wealthy can have businesses that go bankrupt but still be wealthy. As long as no funny business has gone on, embezzlement, transactions intended to defraud creditors, etc., their personal assets will not be touched.
They spend a lot of money getting politicians elected to protect their interests. Buying politicians is cheap and pays huge dividends for the wealthy and corporate interests.
To add, in the UK we have limited companies. This means that unless a separate agreement is made, all debts fall on the company and no one else, so if the company fails, no individual is affected. A side part of this is that if the company does fail, liquidators are usually called in to sell all the assets and reclaim as much capital as possible. However, for this service they usually charge stupid sums such as £550 an hour when working on the case, or £600 just to write a letter. After these fees are paid, there is usually nothing to go to those that were owed in the first place.
Corporations are a separate legal entity. If a corporation goes bankrupt, the directors and officers of the company do not go bankrupt as well, because they are separate from the company.
You don't file for bankruptcy. You file for bankruptcy protection. Bankruptcy court exists to protect the debtor, not punish them. It's an emergency switch you can pull so that you don't have to lose everything when you get in over your head. If you navigate the process correctly and make a good faith effort, it's essentially a big reset button so you're not trapped forever with mistakes or bad luck.
Bankruptcy isn't like I'm Monopoly where you lose everything and you stop going around the board. It's a process where the people that a company is owed money to are given part of it, not all of what is owed to them. It's done in a complicated legal way with judges and lawyers that doesn't matter, but the end result is this. The people that are owed money are somewhat appeased. They get their share of a company's assets, and the shareholders retain a good chunk of the company and are still allowed to continue operations.